In this video, we will be conducting a hive inspection and will also be marking the queen bee so that she's easier to find during the next one. To begin the hive inspection, we will first smoke the bees before opening their brood chamber, which is that bottom brown box. The white box on the top is simply just an extra box where we can put sugar water so the bees can feed off of that. But once we've smoked the bees, we basically reduce their defense mechanism by masking the pheromones that are released by the bees, especially the guard bees. Smoking the bees also makes them think that a forest fire is imminent, which causes them to instinctually go into their honey storage and feed off of it to prepare to move the whole hive. And the purpose of this whole thing is so that the bees are concentrated on something else other than you, so that you won't get stung and so that they stay nice and calm. Alright, so now we've opened the brood chamber and we're just going to smoke it a little bit just to keep them nice and calm. We'll go ahead and put that board against the wall so that the bees can fly off. So now we're going to smoke a little bit more. Now we're going to use this hive inspection tool to break the wax seal that the bees have created between the frames so that we're able to remove the frames individually. So in each of these boxes there's 10 frames. So we'll go ahead and get this silver clamp here and remove one frame and put it into that separate box so that we have room for the other frames so we can remove them without disturbing the bees too much. So as you can tell here, there's not too many bees, which indicates that we haven't quite reached the brood nest, but there is capped honey and nectar, which is a really good sign that the bees are doing quite well. And that frame is also built out quite a lot, which indicates that the bees are healthy and that they're feeding a lot, which is exactly what you want to see after the winter, because the winter can be quite detrimental to the bees. Alright, so as you can see, there's capped honey up there. The bee activity is increasing a little bit as we are going from the right part of the box to the left part of the box. Go ahead and smoke them a little bit now that we've removed 2 frames. But still no sign of the queen bee. The queen bee will be in the brood nest, which will have a lot more activity. I believe there can be up to 8,000 bees per side of a frame. Each brood cycle, the queen bee can lay up to 10,000 eggs, and it takes 21 days for the new bees to come in. So on the top there, that's all capped honey, and there's nectar all in there, and what I'm showing right here is a different species of bee that's known as a robbing bee, but the other worker bees will take care of her and just kill her or whatever. In the front of the hive, when the bee hive isn't as strong, you can put a reducer which basically just makes the opening way smaller. And by having a small opening, you're able to allow the bees to kind of control what comes in and out, which prevents the bees from getting robbed and having them not make it through the season. Up here in the corner we cut out the wax because there was mold, so the bees will naturally refill that. But it won't be as nice as if you had a wax sheet that the bees can kind of build off of. And as you could tell, the trend of the increasing amount of bees is going from right to left, which indicates that their brood nest is most likely on the left-hand side of the box. Alright, so here the bee activity is quite high, but it will keep on increasing. But there you can already start to see all of the pollen that's in the frame. And in the bottom left and right corners, that's what one of those wax sheets looks like. Um, Part of it is missing, but that's just alright, like I explained earlier. So no sign of the queen bee yet. We'll put her back, put the frame back. Quite a few bees here, and what you see, that coloration there on the right in the honeycombs, that is all pollen. And then that glowing stuff in the other ones, that's all nectar. So we thought there could be a possibility that we'll see the queen bee here because there's more activity, but we were not too certain about that because we knew that the bee activity will increase on the other frames. But what we're looking for here is just that the bees are doing well, that they have nectar and honey everywhere, and that the pollen is nice. So here we just smoke them a little bit so that they move out of the way, just in case the queen bee is there. But she wasn't, so we'll go ahead and put that frame back in the box very gently so that we don't crush any bees. It's inevitable, but if you can reduce the amount of bees that you crush, that's always a plus. So now we're reaching the last 4 frames, and this is where the brood nest is, or the bulk of it. So all of this is capped honey, capped nectar, and then the white things within those honeycombs, those are all larvae. So those are tiny bees. Well, they're going to be bees, but and if you see eggs, that's a good sign because that means that the queen bee was there within the last 3 days. So that means that she's active, and that's exactly what you want to see. It's also good when there's the queen bee. She has that long abdomen. So now we're just going to wait for her to get to a good place so that we can grab her and mark her with a pen. But it's good to see that all the honey and the nectar and the pollen is all close in the brood nest because that means that the bees are that they have an effective hive management because all of their resources that they need are close to where all the action is occurring. So I'll go ahead and insert a diagram here that shows why we colored the bee blue. So since we got the queen bee last year in 2020, we'll mark the queen blue because the year ends in 0. But generally every year you will mark the queen bee a new color based on what year it is so that you know how old the queen bee is. They can generally live up to 3 to 4 years, but that just totally depends on the queen bee. Alright, so now we're just gently going to grab the queen bee. We'll wait till she gets in a good position. But it's important to note that the queen bee can sting, and she'll sting longer. But generally she saves that stinging for another queen bee so that she can go ahead and kill her. Also, the queen bee doesn't have a barbed stinger like the worker bees. So when she stings, she won't die because she won't rip out her abdomen like the worker bees do. So now we're just going to put her in that queen container so that that paint can dry for a few minutes so that it doesn't get all over the hive, or that frame rather. Now we put the frame back, let the queen bee dry, and we'll go ahead and continue the hive inspection with the rest of the frames. Just showing a close-up of the bee there. As you can see, the paint is on that container already, which is exactly why we didn't want to just insert her back into the hive. But that blue dot is now very visible, which allows us to very easily find the queen bee. It's also important to be very careful with the queen bee because you don't want to crush her. If you did by accident crush her, you could get a new queen bee, but it's not guaranteed that the other worker bees will integrate that new queen bee, so they might kill her. So it's kind of just a gamble when you get a new bee. Here's just more capped nectar. There's our chickens. Usually the chickens eat any bugs, but they stay away from even dead bees because they just instinctually know that they're harmful. So all that coloration there is the pollen that the bees bring in. Interestingly enough, the bees can carry up to 30% of their body weight with pollen. So if you watch the bees closely, you can sometimes see their legs being orange or yellow, which is all the pollen that they collected. Two more frames to go. As you can tell, the bee concentration is decreasing again, which indicates that we have reached the end of the brood nest. And this was a frame that we let them build out by themselves, and as you can tell, it's not as nice, but they will still get the job done. An interesting fact about the bees is that they're able to communicate with each other across these frames by vibrating. So one bee can communicate with the other side just by vibrating differently. There's so many neat things that you would never know about bees unless you actually have to take care of them and read about them. So we're just smoking a little bit here just to keep the bees calm and have them not be focused on you. So now we're just gently moving those frames back, and we're going to replace that one frame with the cutout here with a new one so that the bees just have something nicer to work on. We had two other colonies, but they didn't make it through the winter, so we're going to give them a frame that has the other bees' honey, so just so that the bees have more food, if you will. We're also venting this bee container a little bit so that the queen bee gets enough air. So what's being shown here, well, what's going to be shown here is a frame that has that wax sheet on there, and that's what we put in the frames so that the bees have a nice foundation to build off of. What you can also do is put 9 frames into one of these boxes rather than 10, and then there's a special tool that allows the spacing to be equal, and what this does is it allows the bees to build out even further from that wax sheet, which just increases their honey storage, which then when you collect the honey, you can get more honey, perhaps. So now we're just going to push the frames together again. And as you can tell, we're not wearing any protective gear, and that's because the bees are so focused on something else, and these are nice bees, they won't try to sting you. So now is a important part, which is putting the queen bee back into the hive. So we're just trying to tap her out, just get her out very gently, and there she is. So she's just going to go on the finger, and boom, she is back in the brood nest. So now we're just going to take that frame out and check what the queen bee is doing, because we really want to make sure that she's continuing her normal business. And as you can see there, that blue dot, that is the queen bee, and she's just feeding off of the nectar. And that was basically the whole hive inspection. So what we did was we opened the boxes, opened the brood chamber, and then we looked for the brood nest. We found the brood nest, and we made sure that all the honey and nectar and pollen is close to the brood nest so that we can tell that the bees are conducting effective hive management. Once we've determined that, we found the queen bee, we marked her so that she's easier to find, and then we just made sure that she's integrating herself back into the colony. So now that we've determined that the queen bee is doing her job, we're just going to very gently put this frame back in. If we were to repeat this process, I would most likely put the bee to where the bee concentration is higher, but it's no worry. She'll do whatever she has to do. There's that new frame that we gave the bees. Now we're just going to push the frames back together. And then we're going to put that dividing board back onto the brood chamber. When a bee lands on you, the main thing is just to not freak out, or else they will most likely sting you. Alright, so here's that dividing board where we have the sugar water on there. I'm just going to line everything up nicely. Get the sugar water. What we'll go ahead and do here is just kind of drip it onto that dividing board so that the bees can easily find the sugar water. And that white thing basically just allows the sugar water to sit above that dividing board so that the bees can go underneath and suck all the sugar water out of there. So now we're going to put that white box back on there very slowly, allow the bees to move, and then we'll put the lid back on the hive, or on that white box. And that was the conclusion of the bee inspection and marking the queen bee. So now I'll just go ahead and walk outside to show you guys that there's not a lot of bee activity because they're still focused on getting all the honey. And that small opening is the bee reducer, which allows the bees to have better control of what comes in and out of the hive.